Round 8. Chip takes on the world. My Uncle Bill died a few years after my father. The death of my Uncle Bill really affected my brother Chip. Chip was 15 when Bill died, and it scared him so bad that he went running up to my mom's room one day and asked, "I'm scared, Mama. Do all the men in our family have to die? Am I next?" He must have realized that he was left with only Grandfather Hammond, a man who didn't like sharing the family's women. Although my mother held and consoled him, rocking him back and forth in an instinctual effort to relieve the grief he was feeling, she couldn't undo what was already in his heart, a prognostication of his own death. He was only 15 when he resigned himself to this self-created fate and began his 10-year journey into death. I heard Mr. Taj Mahal once say, in a rather bluesy way, "Man, if you ain't scared, you ain't right." "Mine head! Mine head!" screamed a European girl who was holding her head between both hands and rocking it back and forth, while she continued to petition for help through her strong verbal pleas. It was late at night and impossible to ignore this girl who was suffering from a mushroom-induced trance. As if the jungle wasn't already resounding enough with its howling monkeys, the sarahuatos, or howlers, roared like tigers from the tree branches that surrounded the Mayan ruins. The howlers' voices ricochet from mystical maze-like game-playing fields up 70-odd flights of stairs following spiraling circles of ancient despair. From one maiden to another, I know they killed virgins there. The screaming girl's peril was no mystery, however. She had done what we had all done that day, us European and American daughters, brought together under the rainfall of the Mexican jungle. We had gone hand in hand with our Mexican partners into the cow pastures and handpicked our own magic mushrooms right from the dung. Through the mist-laden cow pastures we searched for mushrooms that were slimy with manure and also crawling with cloudy white worms. I was told that the mushrooms could be boiled in order to kill the worms and other microscopic parasites, but by doing so, one diluted the high. The three of us in my party opted for the full-strength mushrooms and ate them immediately after hanging up our hammocks in the campsite. I'm not sure what method of consumption the European girl employed. I only know that we were sharing the same high, and her lack of mental composure was aggravating me. I twisted around in the turquoise and white striped hammock thinking, I should have got yellow. I should have got yellow. A bright yellow hammock would have been better. Maybe I can go back tomorrow and they'll have a yellow hammock in size double. Yep, that would be better. My thoughts were interrupted by more screams from the girl, at which point I began to lose my patience with her. I realize, I said to myself, that we are in a foreign jungle, high on mushrooms, where the monkeys are roaring like leopards, and every sound is echoing through the ruins, coming back at us with electrified intensity. And I realize our Mexican compadres look like impostors to us, hippies from the north, having suddenly become strangers with machete eyes. And I concluded, I realize it is raining mud on top of mud, making the whole world appear brown and runny. But damn, girl, your behavior is reprehensible. Eventually, the music Jorge was listening to infiltrated my mind scheme, and I concentrated on my own realities, like my big brother Chip, who I had left back in Denver. a megadose of reality, I would say. I admitted to myself that I had come to Mexico to escape his presence. Shit. I was tired of witnessing self destruction. I just couldn't take any more. But the mushroom high had a mind of its own, and my emotions erupted. As I lay curled up in a fetal heap, right there on the muddy floor of the jungle, I held myself by embracing my knees with my arms, bringing them up close to my heart. I rocked myself just like the girl who was high on mushrooms was rocking her head, only I rocked myself more gently, I'm sure. I cried and cried and cried for my brother Chip and his plight in this world. He couldn't bear the pretense of this Saha world, and so he had let go. At the young age of 15, he had let go of life. And now, 10 years later, he was going to die, and I knew it. And that was long before anyone ever told me with therapeutic certainty. Men die, women survive. The mushrooms had cut to the vitriol, all right. The philosopher's stone exposed. I admitted to myself that which I had always known. Chip had been fighting the battle for all of us, Sabra, Deanna, Geneva, and me. I cried because I realized he was dying. His battle was almost over. The premonition was penetrating insight into my own denial. I had abandoned my brother. I had left him to die all alone in Denver. I continued to cry my traitorous tears through the night because my head was filled with screaming monkeys calling, Chip, Chip. Every hero has to fall, or else there is no catharsis. So the fact that Chip had become a raging alcoholic and drug addict at the age of 15 is understandable. Chip was never diminished in my eyes, however, because there was so much truth to his struggle. I understood his battle on some gut level. I knew he would always be the brother who had loved and cherished me for me. He was forever slaying dragons for me when we were little, even when the dragon happened to be our own father. One time our daddy, who wholly believed in spanking children, took a 4-year-old Chip into his den for a spanking. Chip took 3 hard swats from my dad's open hand before he turned around and smacked my dad right square on the kisser. Chip just wasn't into taking any shit from anybody, which of course made my all-star father real happy. He was raising a little man all right, in the image of his father. Another time my mom and dad went out for dinner and cocktails with friends. Maybe it was a bridge party, and while they were gone, some oily greaser guys came by to see my older sisters. It was one of the first times my parents left us kids without a babysitter to watch us. Unfortunately, it signaled a door wide open to these undesirables, who were interested in my beautiful sisters in a less than upright way. When my sisters refused to let these guys in, one of them smashed his cast-laden arm through the door window. My brother charged upstairs, pulling me along. "Come on, Nici," he said. Chip got his BB gun and pulled the screen off of his bedroom window. We went out on the roof, and Chip started blasting little copper pellets into the rear ends of the wannabe pimpsters. They snorted and cussed at us, mimicking hyenas, as they hustled to their car. Chip turned and smiled his most mischievous smile at me. His dimples deepened with the victory. When my parents got home from their evening out, they found the house in an uproar, with the broken glass and all. When my father started to chastise us, my sister Deanna took off in a hurry down the street. Deanna was threatening to run away forever in a display of her own fury. I think she was trying to divert my father's attention from the greasy guy issue, because she didn't want to get in trouble. Deanna, he yelled, you get back in the house right this minute. Deanna kept walking. My cocktailed up father was every bit a match for his strong willed daughter. Deanna, Daddy said, his voice sizzling, you get back in the house if you want to live one more minute. Then he turned to address the rest of his kids, who were all in a huddle on the front lawn. He stated, get back in the house, all of you, if you know what's good for you. We did. Because of the seriousness of the offense committed by us that evening, in eye-open hindsight, I ask, what on earth had we done? My brother and sisters and I were lined up execution style, from tallest to shortest, oldest to youngest, and my father demanded an account of the night's fiascos. I was mortified. I had managed somehow to escape my father's spankings, humiliating as I knew they were, by making sure I was gooder and gooder and gooder than any kid should be. That night, however, I was sure I was doomed, because Daddy had us lined up firing squad fashion in order to be spanked, one at a time. Torture. How could I escape? The knots in my stomach were getting tighter and tighter. I disassociated myself, mind from body, once it was my turn to get spanked on the hiney. Because I was already a bona fide incest survivor, no simple spanking from a purported nurturer named Father was going to throw me off balance. Either I would die or I wouldn't, the survivor in me surmised, and then questioned, why can't someone just explain to him what happened? Before Daddy even got started on the punishing procedure, the prisoner of circumstance next to me stepped forward in a bold way and declared, I'll take the blame. Let me take the spanking for all of us, said the brave-hearted Chip. What did you say, son? Asked my father, who was caught off guard once again by his honorable son. I said, I'll take the spanking for all of us, Dad, reaffirmed Chip. Let them go to bed. Well, Chip, Daddy sounded winded because he was choking on his admiration for his 9-year-old son. You can all go to bed with the warning that the next time your mother and I are out, I don't want to come home to this kind of scene and deal with this kind of behavior. He ended his spiel like Father knows best and looked directly at Deanna, giving her a real tough guy, manly look, a look she would pursue forever after. Suavecito, suavecito. Jorge's radio blasted a hot salsa tune that filled in the edges of the Picasso-angled night. Mine head, I said to myself softly. It's time to get home to my desperado. I made it back to Denver just in time to see him die. He had about 3 weeks left in him, and I wasn't far behind. Gracias a la vida is the name of some Mexicana song that works well to define what's in this heart of mine. I survived my hero Chip because I managed to hang on. I managed to continue to read, recite, and act on the Lotus Sutra in its true intent, and because of it, continue to live when I know I should have died. Before his death, and right after my return from Mexico, Chip and I were strolling down a Denver alley together. He threw his big man arm around my shoulders and asked what I was thinking. I was just thinking about how cold it is, Chip, I replied. Funny, he said. I was thinking the same thing, sis. We were talking about the world, in case you didn't get it. Walking down that Denver alley with my brother by my side nourished me. His skin was gangrene gray. His clothes were a bit musty smelling. He was puffy around his face from all the hardcore toxins he contained, but he still had plenty of power. He was tough, sharp, shrewd, magical, fun-loving, shit-talking, and incredibly handsome. He could play the mouth harp, too. He understood the blues. He died at the age of 26, just like his Uncle Bill. The coroner's report read, "What a mixture!" Inside him swam enough liquor and hard narcotics to kill 3 lesser men. His death wish had been fulfilled, for certain. The steam from Shikiro's nostrils hit the air like dragon fire, forming clouds in the Colorado sky. I had left Chip's apartment early that day in order to go riding. It was about mid-afternoon when I knew that something was askew. Perhaps the line of the day changed abruptly, or a slight shift in the feel of the earth beneath us hinted at imbalance. Because I was astride Shikiro and bareback, I was able to pick up on the nuance. The bare trees did not whisper. The wind was still. A single crow perched on the shoulder of that suggestive day and cawed out in warning. Several magpies flew into the burnished pink-hued setting that penetrated the horizon. The smell of death transfixed my spirit. Shikiro's hoofs crunched their prints into the frozen snow as I rode him against the motionless sky. In warmer days, before his demise, Chip had sported physical perfection. With his soft brown, sun-kissed skin, sparkling sable eyes, and his long, lean, able body adorned with a thick shaft of sandy-colored hair, he epitomized godlike human qualities. He was what the Greeks and Romans fantasized. His thick honey lips were soft as a horse's muzzle, velvet like the insides of a morning glory flower, opened up and hollow. The women swarmed around him, intoxicated by his essence, and he took advantage. He had it all and made it look like nothing. There was an easiness about him that was relieving to people. But society was threatened by a boy so alive in his passion and expression, with a father who had suicided before him. Langston Hughes penned a universal when he said, "Nobody loves a genius child. Kill him and let his soul run wild." The police harassed him constantly. They went out of their way to chase him around our middle-class neighborhood, creating scenarios that reminded me of a Dick Tracy cartoon. Every night there were phone calls from the Denver Police Department. "Juvenile Division, please come get your son." More hell was the look in my mom's eyes as she sauntered out the front door to go retrieve what she had already buried: drunken men who burdened her life. She would bring Chip home brazen with the alcohol still in him. Some nights Chip would swing wild punches at whoever was around, cursing at his mean, possessed by his own anger and confusion. I'm sure he mouthed off at the detectives and rookie policemen alike, giving them justification for the beatings they gave him during the elevator ride down at the station. One time he came home with his wrists so swollen and bloody from the handcuffs they had on him that I screamed inside in horror. Don't let them kill my brother. Don't let them kill my brother. As it turned out, however, he didn't need their help. One summer evening, when the skies were true blue and the grass was green lush beneath my brother's bare feet, he was arrested in our neighborhood park for something or other. It was early in the evening and he wasn't drunk yet, so who knows why they were harassing him. Maybe just because he was so young and fine and virile. Anyway, one policeman said, "Fawcett, you're nothing but a punk-ass baby boy, and I'm going to teach you some manners. Get your ass into the car." Then he shoved my handcuffed brother into the squad car. Chip turned his 15-year-old head around and said, "Sir, do you want me to go home crying to my mama because you called me a boy? I know I'm not a man yet." "Slam," said the squad car door. "Got news for you, brother. You're one step closer." I hated the way they took the earth from under his bare feet, the way they stole his soul from me. Shikiro turned his head and nipped at my boot-clad big toe. He wanted to know what on earth I was waiting for. "Either he is dying or he's dead," said the nod and tucked head stance of Shikiro, who began to trot sideways in anticipation. That was probably one of the only times I put Shikiro away wet. I usually made sure he was dry and cool before I left him, but the notion of Chip's death was too strong to ignore, so I just slipped Shikiro's bridle off of him and headed for the car. I drove over to my aunt's house. My aunt was out of town at some yoga convention, and I had been staying with the kids. There was a note on the door that read, "Gone to Denver General Hospital to see Chip." I went inside, called the hospital, and was told by a nurse to come on down. "But how is he?" I asked. "Come down," she said. When I entered the hospital, the nurse at the reception area grabbed my arm and led me through some doors that led to the body of my dead brother. There he was, big and handsome as ever, so omnipotent looking, even in his death stance, that it was kind of hard to take in the fact that he was lying dead on a hospital cot. He looked so free and full of fresh air, like a soul totally unfettered by its earthly loss. It was the first time I saw him unbloated in all his years as a man. He had a very worldly and polished look about him, like a real successful business and family man combined, kinda wholesome. I stared down at him and got carried away with memories. I recalled his freckled chipmunk cheeks and the way he always included me in on everything with a "come on, sis" nod of his head. I remembered our early morning conversations as we sat together on the front porch folding papers for the route we had. No matter where I tried to hide myself from Chip, he always found me under some sister's covers, and with a brisk wake-up shake, he would pull me out of bed and tell me I had exactly 10 minutes or so to rise and shine, and front and center to the porch where the folding took place. After we folded up the papers, we loaded the canvas bags and set out on our bikes to deliver the news to Denver. I endured the biting cold of winter, and although I froze, it was worth it when it was over, because I felt like a Spartan who ruled. I would send those papers spiraling through the air. Whack was the sound of the paper as it hit the ground, and I would turn my bike-turned horse named Silver to the opposite side of the street and slam another. A solitary man lived in a big spooky house across the street from us. He was on our paper route. We speculated that he was some kind of Frankenstein creator, the way he kept a light on all night that we could see through his attic window. When we delivered the paper to his house, we always circled our way in cautiously, fearful of his appearance. Whoever was throwing would let the paper fly like a long shot from our hand, allowing it to slide across the front porch into the front door screen with a whish rather than a whack in order to maintain our distance. We got a big dose of that old man's evil on Christmas Eve when he invited us over for hot chocolate and treats. We polished our teeth, combed our hair, and headed to the house of Beware. Once we got there and Chip knocked on the door, a formidable fellow greeted us there. He said, "Come in." We did. The next thing you know, this man was feeding us hot chocolate and cake, commending us sincerely for the wonderful job we had been doing. He handed us each an envelope filled with $5 and a giant chocolate bar to boot. Mr. Evil was turning out to be all right. Here was a man who supported our hard-working efforts, a message I carried with me forever. It seemed like no matter how evil a villain could get, people were mostly good, I thought. When I left that man's house that evening, I felt like I had a life that was truly worth living. Unfortunately, the next stop on the Christmas Eve agenda was Nana's in Hammond's. How I hated going there! It was despicable the way all the sauced up, dirty old men would grab us little girls and hold us by the fanny in the cups of their hands, up to the mistletoes that hung from the ceilings. The decorated women would giggle and turn their heads uncomfortably, thinking to themselves, "Men will be men," while we, their daughters and granddaughters, would be dangling helplessly while held high up in the air. We were, quite naturally, absolutely panicked because it was impossible to keep our Christmas dresses pulled down over our frilly panties. The mistletoe meant they had a chance to kiss us too, and they did, brandy breath and all. We tried to turn our heads quick before those nasty old doctors and lawyers and good old boys of Denver distinction could sneak their forked pink tongues into our innocent mouths. I wandered the streets of Denver for months after Chip's death. I was totally dazed and felt like a homeless refugee in my own way. Sometimes people I hadn't seen in a while would drive by and stop me. "Hey, Nici, what are you up to?" they'd ask. "Oh, nothing," I'd reply. "You okay?" they'd continue. "Yeah," I'd say. "How's your brother?" they'd want to know. "He's dead," I'd say back to their awestruck faces. "Chip is dead?" they would repeat unbelievingly, as if they were hearing the impossible. He had seemed so indestructible. We live in a world of wait until it's too late. If you don't believe me, ask a Jewish person who has escaped Sobibor what it takes to convince a world of heinous, inhumane behavior. There are a few survivors who can muster up the wherewithal to relate their tragic stories. But who wants to hear a world that turned its back on millions of burning people, the Czechs and Poles who sold them back to the Germans if they found them running from and trying to hide from the Nazi monsters, charging concentration camp escapees rent for a hole in a barnyard floor? Certainly not, proclaims a world that's working overtime on bank accounts that total the cosmos. What's a human life? An incested child has known every thief in the night. She will grow up to discover herself, perhaps never. She will be the prostitute, stripper, battered and abused woman of truth, her life screaming, yes, there is a tragic flaw. There are others, however, who will function, function, function to uphold the pretense at all costs, as if they are no less a mockery than their sisters who stage the ridiculed truth. Their shrouded emotions will haunt them none the less, as they see that their own denial allows for the perpetuation to continue, and as they turn their backs on their children, pretending everything is all right, the perpetrator is gaining Hitler power, finding out how easy it is to get away with murder. Incest is not an act of God's love for a child. It certainly isn't a karma exclusive. Every time I open up my front door, I trip over Bangkok. Sophisticated sex trips to go and buy children? That's what money can buy?